All righty. Good morning.
Good morning.
So when I was here 4 short weeks ago, I mentioned that there were so many things that I had been led by Spirit to share with you that I had to map it all out. And so today I'm returning to that mind map. I thought about bringing it to you and showing you. I just want us to continue exploring the bigger theme that I was told was cultivating well-being in a year of Jubilee. So we're holding the year of Jubilee out here because I don't know. I just don't know. But cultivating well-being, we'll keep digging. Let me first remind you of the scriptural threads that were woven into my January message, so you'll remember they apply to today too. The first passage from Luke 4 tells of a time when Jesus stood in the front of the temple, which was a big deal. It was a rite of passage to be able to read from the scriptures. So he was reading the scroll from Isaiah, the chapter 61. And in this, Isaiah says, and it kind of infers Jesus, they have both been anointed to bring good news to the poor, release the captive, recover sight to the blind, set free the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of Jubilee. The remaining 3 passages I read illustrate Jesus' varied responses as to what was going on around him. And they weren't the only ones, but they're the key ones. In the book of Mark, Jesus angrily overturns the tables of the money changers in the most sacred area, the temple. Early in the book of Matthew, after a day of speaking and miracle making, Jesus seeks isolation from the throngs of people so that he can pray alone. And then later on in Matthew, we observe his near silence in the face of his own condemnation and crucifixion at the hands of the government, this time the Roman government. Another important thread I want to continue is that way that our biographies, the personal stories of our lives, continually shape who we are and what we do in response to both the external world and the internal world. What makes it seem more like 4 eons since the last week of January has been this undoubtable, unrelenting, unfolding demolition of our social, governmental, and humanitarian structures, as my grandmother would have said, for good or for naught. We don't know because it's not the end of the story yet, but right now it seems like it's surreal. I told Mary this morning, I feel like I'm living in a sci-fi film and I don't have a script. Mm-hmm. It appears that the United States, as we know it, is in this total out-of-control spin-out while the rest of the world is holding on to the dashboard, waiting and watching. It's impossible to turn on any electronic device and not be inundated with endless reports and opinions and alerts from all sides of the spectrum. In fact, I've tried to, and it's like I'm in silence most of the day. It feels as though, to me, we've reached that point of singularity that I've spoken about before on my geeky messages. What's true this morning may not be true this afternoon. And what felt like solid ground when we went to bed has turned into quicksand by the morning. But I bring this message to meeting for worship not to sound any more alarms that haven't already been sounded, or to add to the overwhelm at a time when I feel like quiet worship in spirit and in community is what we need. I bring it more as an exploration of several questions that have arisen out of these life-altering, world-changing events. The first question that has surfaced for me is, how do I know what's the right thing to do when there's so much to be done and so much that can be done? The answer to this is where our personal stories come into play. If you've identified the passions and the values and the skills and the experience that are uniquely yours, you've discovered a perfect starting point for what to do. Michael Meade, a contemporary mythologist and author, has a book entitled Why the World Doesn't End, Tales of Renewal in a Time of Loss, which I would love to read. He points us out into the right direction when he writes these words. Our job is not to comprehend or control everything, but to learn which story we are in, which of all the many things calling out in the world is calling to us. That calling. Our job is to be fully alive in the life we have, to pick up the invisible threads of our own stories and follow where they lead. Our job is to find the thread of our own dreams and live them out all the way to the end. So what invisible threads from your life stories, from your own unique individuality, form the unique path to follow, like breadcrumbs from Hansel and Gretel, except nobody's going to eat these. If you have a really good memory, we talked about gifts and values toward the end of last year. I don't have a really good memory, and I'm the one that brought it. I don't know when that message was. I know it was the end of last year sometime. But the totality of who we are individually, to me, is like God's fingerprints all over us. Like we're, that clay thing. You can't get the fingerprints of the clay shaper out of us. If we pay close attention to those threads that have us feel totally alive, we will find a sure path through what Harry Fosdick, the 20th century Baptist preacher and firebrand, you should look him up, Fosdick, Fosdick. He was the founding minister of Riverside Church in New York, but he had a life long before that. He called this these times of great peril. Well, what does it mean for us to pay attention to those invisible threads, to what brings us fully alive? The best place to begin paying attention is by centering down on a daily basis, maybe even more than once a day, to eat a few times a day, just to check in with our spirits. I know I'm saying daily. I know that sounds like a lot, but desperate times call for desperate measures. And you scroll on your phone, you look at the television, or listen to NPR for 10 minutes. Surely you can center down for 10 minutes. That settled time of expectant waiting to ask what God has to say to us is the best starting place to notice What kindles my light? For several years, my centering prayer began with one simple question. What is it I need to know? And obviously I didn't get it for like 6 months. I got the same answer. But once I would ask the question, I would just sit in silence quietly until I had a sense of that answer from within. Do y'all remember those huge portable chalkboards that teachers used to use? My chemistry teacher, Mr. Roadhouse, used it and filled it with moles and formulas and all that stuff you learn in chemistry. Well, when I settle into a time of quietude, I imagine myself in front of one of those giant chalkboards on wheels, and I erase all the writing that's been crammed onto my mind's huge chalkboard, and the dust of all those articles and opinions and my fears and worries, what my inner self has to say to me, it just goes flying through the air and it just disappears. And if my worrisome thoughts still continue and they write something more on the chalkboard after I've already cleaned it off, I just erase it until I can await the authentic guidance from my inner teacher. Every now and then, an answer from source will appear in writing on my imaginary chalkboard. And sometimes it's just that sense of the eternal presence that enfolds me, and it calms me down and settles my spirit. I imagine myself standing in that during the day. And other times, it is such a lengthy message that I have to get out my journal and mind map it. But no matter the answer, no matter if we don't even get a sense of an answer, simply pausing long enough to stand on the solid rock of that Christ light within us, that restores my inner balance after I've been sinking in the sands of whatever chaos humans have wrought, myself included, because it's my reaction to the chaos that's worse than anything. And that solid rock transcends all of that noise, all those words. In Britain yearly meeting Faith and Practice, Gordon Matthews begins his entry on social justice with these words. We need both a deeper spirituality and a more outspoken witness. If our spirituality can reach the depths of authentic prayer, our lives will become an authentic witness for justice, peace, and the integrity of creation, which I love. And that witness then becomes the context for our prayers. So it's kind of the Quaker and the chaplain model combined: reflection, action, reflection. I agree with Gordon Matthews, so much so that I often cite his entire entry, on how inner spirituality and outward action actually balance each other, and then they feed upon each other. The scriptures I referenced today illustrate how Jesus sought this kind of balance between outer activism and inner activism. Being balanced and grounded in spirit helps us respond out of love instead of reacting out of fear. So how many of you have sung in a choir? Maybe I should say, how many of you haven't sung in a choir? How many of you have sung in a choir? A lot of us. So about half of us, really. So I'll make it simple for those of you who've never sung in a choir. Singers aren't supposed to take a breath where there's kind of an obvious break in the phrase of words but there's not a comma. Did y'all know that? That even applies to the hymns we sing. I try, but I'm out of shape. But if there's no comma, there's no breath. So all of us who've performed in choral groups, we know that it's impossible to sustain a long, commaless stretch of words with one single breath, like Mozart's Requiem. So we take a breath somewhere else in the phrase of words other than the obvious break. You will get a dirty look from the director if you do that. All choral singers eventually learn that that's how you do it. And so somehow not everyone takes a breath in the same spot. The resulting music sounds like a seamless flow of voices with breaks only where the composer intended them. So to me, the same is always true for living your light. If you need to take a breather, take a breather. Don't worry. The rest of us in the choir will sing through the gap for you. So take a break, as long and as many as you need. Now we all know that all God's critters have a place in the choir. Even if you don't know not to breathe in a break where there's no comma. We find our own unique place in that choir by following the invisible threads. I skipped a whole page because I have something really, really good I want to tell you. No, where did it go?
That was your breather.
No, it's page 4. Okay, so back to that. I'm going to skip over back to where I was. Another question was, what do we do when our outer actions don't feel as big or as bold or as bright or brave as we think they should be? How many have thought that in the past 4 weeks? I think Quakers set a pretty high standard for being an authentic witness in the world. As I thought about it, I can name several Quakers who have lost their lives just in the past decade, speaking truth to power around the world. And it wasn't in the past decade, but what's his name, Fox? Tom Fox.
Yeah.
I think about him.
You know, I think about him and Bonnie and all the people I know who have died living their witness. What if it feels that our deep gladness is just a little nibble when it comes to feeding the world's deep hunger? I admit I have judged myself a lot. A friend called me out on it last week with my inability to step up to the Quaker plate over these past 14 months as I've recovered from that brain injury. Holding people in the light, having a brief conversation, sending a card, well, that just doesn't seem like much of a contribution when so many people are in such need, even among our community. But I'm convinced there can never be too much light giving and light holding and too many people who are doing that. The shift in the Earth's energy has actually been scientifically observed when a large group of people, I think there were 10,000 people, intentionally prayed at the same time while that energy was being measured. But the same is true for just a simple kindness. Studies have shown that not only the serotonin levels increased in the person who received the kindness, But the same is true for the person extending the kindness, as well as anyone who observes the act of kindness. So our invisible threads make a web that affects everyone in the area of them. So there's no such thing as not enough when it comes to being the change we wish to see in the world. Tracy had a student, an IT student, who was 94, and her job, she was homebound, her job was she created cards out of her printer to send to the shut-ins in her big Baptist church. That was her job. Lastly, there's the opposite end of the spectrum of how much is enough when it comes to being and having an outspoken witness. Well, let me tell you, there isn't a fire extinguisher big enough to douse the entire world's woes. So how do we act in service to others without depleting our own sense of hope and faith, our vitality, our spirit? Over the past 4 weeks, I don't know if this has been true for you, but it's felt like I can't let up off the gas with my responses and my reactions. It's as though we need to counteract all the chaos by keeping pace with the constant bombardment of changes and affronts. But if we take a step back, we'll see really clearly that life is full of progress and pauses. Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics, used to call it zoom and eke. You would fly forward and slam on the brakes. That's just life. Jesus modeled that for us by rowing out onto a lake or climbing a mountain or going to the desert to take time away from pressing matters, from unhealed wounds and unrelenting needs. So now we get back to the choir, where if you need a breath, take a breath. And we know we all have a place in this world of need, in life that is microscopic and macroscopic. We find that place by following our unique, invisible threads of life and the nudges of spirit to wherever, whenever, whatever, whomever they lead us. That, to me, is an authentic witness, is being willing to go. I had potatoes on the stove one day, long ago, cooking lunch for my family that was coming, and I had a message to go to Friendship Friends meeting, which I had never been to, and give not a prepared message, but to stand up out of meeting and give a message. I was eldered for doing that, because you just don't stand up and give a message for one person. I said, I have a message for one person. And I said it, and I got eldered. And the woman met me in the parking lot and said, I am here from Georgia visiting my family. And I needed to hear that. Cora Garner was ironing her clothes when she was led to revive the church in Trinity that I used to go to. That she was just ironing, and she cut off the iron and left out to go do what she was led to do. Some of us are led to send light and love and cards. Others are publicly and boldly protesting, while another bunch is using the 5 Calls app, and they're contacting their elected officials every day. Yet another group is vetting information to ensure that the most accurate narratives are being reported. All the while, there are millions of invisible threads woven around the world, serving humanity in countless countries and in countless ways. Each of us has a place to fill in this choir, a voice to share, gifts to offer, stories to tell. We can contribute positively. I really believe this. We can contribute positively to the expanding possibilities that lie ahead and that are currently unfolding. We have a say in what the future looks like. When we're fully alive, fully grounded and balanced in spirit, and inspired by that light within us, our invisible threads can and do intertwine, and they will weave a brighter story for all of creation. So it is. Amen.